How many of you have already heard some fascinating stuff today and are thinking about your business and thinking about how you might necessarily engage and put that to action? Okay, and how many of you are just thinking about the sun outside and wishing you were maybe sitting outside there? You don't have to put your hands up for that. Well, I'm John Richardson. I am not from nowhere, as I was described earlier on. You probably have detected, and this has now been introduced, that I'm from Northern Ireland. I am an author, a consultant, generally to a wide variety of hospitality businesses, and a little bit broader than that too. And I have, in the past, owned a large variety of different types of businesses. So I suppose that term serial entrepreneur, to a certain extent, applies to me. But what I want to talk about today is a little project that I did about 5 or 6 years ago, which was based on a golf challenge, and the story that came out of that, and really some of the things that have happened as a result of that. So the story starts basically. Well, before I begin, what I'm sort of very aware of is sometimes you can come up and say, here's a story of a year of my life and a great thing, and it's been turned into a film. And the people that come on stage are sometimes these exceptionally dynamic folk, and you think I could never be like that. I think you have to understand that my natural state is not like that at all. My natural state veers between one of two things. Well, first of it, it's sort of like this, in front of the TV, and the second one is this, hey, drinking in a pub. And I was, even in my early 20s, still being described by my father as a good time Charlie. So I'm not up here in any way which is one of those brilliant old-fashioned expressions, but I'm not in any way the type of person that's going to come up here and say, hey, you can be like me. I'm trying to say how I maybe went through 2 or 3 processes as a result of this golf challenge, managed to get a couple of interesting things done off the back of that, and hopefully that story matters in terms of a business processes, your businesses, and on a personal basis too. So our story starts with the hero, me, and like most Irish stories, it starts in a pub. In 1996, I was there with my business partner at that stage, and we were sitting there in an enormously stereotypically Irish fashion, pint of Guinness each, and a halfin of whiskey, which is again a term that people don't talk about anymore, but basically a measure of whiskey. But this isn't a story of joy, this isn't a story of something great, this is a story of ritual humiliation. Because a year previous to this, we had the largest sandwich business in Ireland. We had, through what I would regard as some small amount of sort of skill, but a large amount of luck, managed to grow a very large business in sandwiches at the right place at the right time. But we had also then managed to make a number of fundamental mistakes. We had brought along a new business partner who stole a lot of money from us. We had grown far, far too fast. We hadn't controlled the cash flow. We hadn't applied the sound, basic business principles. So we went from 60 staff, a factory, multiple sites, big flash cars, the whole sort of lifestyle at 28, to losing everything at 29, sitting in front of our creditors and having a humiliating meeting with them where they decided to make us bankrupt or not. They didn't make us bankrupt, but we still lost everything. Now, I know this is a relatively entrepreneurial community that might be here. How many of you have been in and around that kind of position yourselves? I know there's a couple of folk I spoke to last night. Yeah, I mean, yes, it's quite common. It's increasingly common, and it's happening at the moment. I think the humiliation from it is much less now. But for me, it was a very good driver because you bounce back very easily in your 20s, and we did bounce back, but it still was humiliating. You have to endlessly talk to friends, family, extended relations, colleagues about what went on. You have to try and make the excuses for it, but you have to try and take the responsibility. So the way that we bounced back was we managed to scrape together a very, very small amount of money, borrowed bits and pieces of money, borrowed some very old fish and chip shop equipment, and managed to secure a 1.5-year lease on a site in my hometown of Bangor in Northern Ireland. And on that site, we put together a pretty horrible chip shop, but we managed to work it well enough so that it made a profit through that whole 1.5-year period. But in my mind, I was thinking, I'm never being in that position again. I'm never going to sit there in that humiliation of having completely messed it up. So what I did, we split it between me and my business partner. I worked in the evenings, and he worked during the day, working evenings in the chip shop, don't know whether any of you have ever done it, but it's a revolting job, because you're basically, you're dealing with drunks, and they sometimes think it's hilarious to chuck their chips back at you, and all sorts of lovely things like that. So this was continuing humiliation. But what I did during the day was, I worked on trying to create the perfect model for a fish and chip shop. That was going to be the next business. We wanted to try and get enough money back together again, get some credit back with our suppliers, get some credibility back with bankers and backers, and we wanted to put together this amazing fish and chip shop, but we wanted to put it together from the context of me and my business partner at that stage never working a single shift in it ourselves. So the thing had to be this model that worked perfectly from day one. So we put it together, and I worked, as I say, all the evenings, and then during the day to create this model. We created this fish and chip shop, and ultimately that fish and chip shop went on to was voted the best fish and chip shop in Ireland. It won all sorts of awards. It was the first fast food outlet to ever to be listed in the Bridgestone Irish Food Guide. We sold it for approximately 50% more than you would sell an equivalent type of business of that type, primarily because we had this amazing system wrapped around it. So that was the first little part of the story in terms of changing things dramatically from a business perspective within 1 year. So I come out of that, and we went on and we did a variety of different businesses after that. Did garden centers, restaurants, bars, a few other different things. Had a reasonable amount of success in a number of those, a couple of failures along the way too, but a lot of other different types of businesses. But that model that I'd created utterly changed the way that we then ran business. And that happened within the 1 year. So it reached a few years ago, about 6 years ago, I decided at the age of 37, actually I'm lying now because it's more than 6 years ago, but at the age of 37 I decided that I wanted to try and get good at golf. I had seen Seve Ballesteros playing the Irish Open in 1982, and Seve Ballesteros is one of those amazing athletes, amazing people who manages to transcend their sport. He's like a Muhammad Ali or an Ayrton Senna or a George Best, one of those people that just moves way out beyond the sport and inspires lots of people. And when I was 15 and I watched Seve at the Irish Open, I remember watching him and thinking, that's amazing. That's the most amazingly charismatic, fascinating character. I would love to be able to do that. But if we come back to me being the slob and the good time Charlie, I didn't do anything about it. I just kind of dreamt of winning the British Open and walking up there like Seve, and perhaps Seve coming up and talking to me. And I used to talk in my head like Seve. I won the British Open. And that's all I did. I didn't do any practice. I didn't do any work at it at all. I then got to 16, discovered girls and beer, and did nothing then for many years. Now, I had the tiniest inkling in my mind that I could have been good at golf, simply because I'd had 2 or 3 vaguely decent rounds at that stage. But it was all totally in my mind. So I reached the age of 37, and I thought, 40's coming up. I don't know how many of you are moving towards 40 who have done that 40 thing, but 40 was coming up. We'd managed to get the business stuff sorted, and I thought, this is a personal thing that I want to try and do. I want to not be that good time Charlie who doesn't see it through. One of my closest friends, my best friend at primary school, once didn't let me play a game of football with all of the rest of them because he said I was a messer. And so I have all of this baggage in terms of stuff that I didn't manage to do just because I like having a laugh and messing about. But I got to 37, I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try and break par within a year. Now, at this stage, I wasn't I hadn't retired with a whole stack of money. We had about two garden centers, 120 staff, 73 miles between the two of them, and I was regularly going between them with sort of 40, 50-hour working week. I was married with a child, and I decided that I still wanted to try and break par within golf within a year when I couldn't break 100. Now, for those of you who don't play golf, basically I was a really rubbish golfer, and I wanted to try and become a very good golfer within a year. Now, I went off on this little challenge, and I managed to get hold of some famous golfers, Darren Clarke and Sam Torrance, both of whom told me it was impossible. Sam Torrance famously told a friend of mine when he was described about the challenge, tell him to dream on. See how we're relating to this? And so he told him to dream on. I thought that was great because this was at the start of the challenge, and I thought, yes, I'll do it. That's no problem. I don't care. What does Sam Torrance think? Now, I'm not going to give you all the details of that year, but obviously that came back to haunt me on more than one time. Darren Clark said an absolute minimum period of time you would need would be 3 years to do what I was doing. So I had all of these people saying that it wasn't possible, and to a large extent, for a period of time, that was quite beneficial. When I was shooting some horror rounds, it obviously worked against me. It sort of removed my belief that it was possible. But during that year, I hit 70,000 golf balls in practice. I read 60 books on golf and sort of sports psychology. I watched 30-odd different types of video in terms of golf techniques and training, including the Seve short game video, which I watched 20 times over the space of the year. I listened to dozens of tapes and golf hypnosis tapes and all sorts of guff. And I totally turned my life upside down. It would also be fair to say that I turned our family life upside down. I annoyed my wife quite infuriatingly, not for the first time in my life, obviously, and probably I have done it since. But I, at the end of the year, managed to break par. 3 days to go. Actually, yesterday, 6 years ago. So I broke par. I'd managed to be writing an article in Golf Digest at the same time. I had been blogging about it. There'd been a lot of stuff on the internet about it. So there was a really big deal about it. The biggest circulation magazine, a golf magazine in the UK, did a 5-page piece in it. So it's huge amounts of press. It was on TV a couple of times. All of this great stuff happened. And I thought, well, I originally thought I wanted to write a book anyway, but I thought, easy, I'll now go out and write the book, and I'll make £1 million pounds. And I got an agent for the initial draft of the book, and she talked about potentially making up to £100,000 in terms of the advance. That didn't happen. I had 83 rejections for that book, and we eventually got it published through with a new agent and with a very small publisher in Northern Ireland. After I had tweaked and amended and changed and pretty much altered everything in the book from the original version that was out there. Because I had written a book originally that was a sort of the sort of book that you would write in terms of O-level or GCSE English. You put in stupid similes and all those things that they teach you to put in. And I hadn't worked out how to create a book that people want to read. So during that year after the golf, what I did was change the whole book so that it created this book that people wanted to read. And I did about another whole year of very extensive work to create a book that ultimately could be published. And I made it. Now, I was doing all of this again on top of other work because I had sold out of the garden centre, but I was started the consultancy business, and we were doing an awful lot of work with a lot of clients. So I was trying to cram all of this in first thing in the morning and last thing at night. Eventually got it published. But I also knew that actually it's extraordinarily difficult. Well, it's hard to get a book published to begin with. It's also very hard to get a book to sell well. So I then went on a crusade for the next year in an effort to try and get this book promoted and published, because the publisher that we got, they're brilliant, but they've a tiny little marketing department. They don't really have a marketing department. So their ability to promote the book was very limited. Conveniently, this was at the start of Twitter, it was at the start of a lot of social media, and I was able to harness that. I did a lot of work on Twitter and managed to, through a little bit of hustle, a little bit of perhaps pulling the wool over some people's eyes, but I did manage to get the book to #1 in the golf charts on Amazon via Twitter. Now, that's getting #1 golf charts on Amazon actually isn't a huge deal. It's relatively easy to do. But if you spin that through to traditional PR and you say, here's the first guy, because at that stage, nobody felt that anybody could ever make money out of Twitter. There are lots of great stories about Twitter making money now, but that was the first story of somebody tangibly doing something with Twitter which created a business result. So I then spun that into traditional PR, and we managed to then get much more coverage from it. I hustled and hustled and hustled and hustled for the rest of that year and managed to get eventually a book into Sam Torrance's hand, and then he talked about it at the British Open about 3 years ago now? Yeah, 3 years ago. And the book went basically to top of the sports charts, top of the autobiography charts. It stayed top of the sports charts for about 2 months. It reached number 13 overall in Amazon. It pretty much has been the best-selling golf book in the UK over the last 2 years. It was briefly the best-selling golf book in the States. It's been the best-selling golf book in Germany for months now. And ultimately, off the back of that, it's now being made into a film. So that little challenge that started with the golf, and then 2 or 3 chunks of really hard work during separate years, ultimately ends up in a film that starts to be shot in Elstree in about a month and a half. Now, I looked back at all of this after I'd finished, and 2 or 3 other stories, because as I say, the slightly interesting thing, this is effectively an hour and a half's talk, which we have then turned into, for some corporate clients, into a 2-day workshop. So the Northern Irish accent helps me to cram it all into this space. But basically, I looked back and I thought, you know, what's the commonality? What happened there? How did I move from being this? And I'm still naturally that fella who likes to just sit in front of the TV or have a bit of a laugh in the pub. How did I manage to move from being that person to actually getting off my arse and actually doing the work, actually seeing challenges for whatever they may be right through? And there was a commonality between them, because what I discovered that most of those individual challenges basically happened over a period of a year. Each one of them then pretty much transformed my life. And they took about 1,000 hours of extra work over and above what I was doing on a day-to-day basis to try and pay the bills and keep my wife and my daughter happy, with varying success at times. So I then thought, well, what did that create ultimately? And I worked out that actually, in most of those things, it put me into the top 1% of the various categories. And in the top 1% of whatever you do, amazing things happen. So less than 1% of golfers ever break par. And if anybody's played golf at any level at all, everybody wants to get to scratch or to break par at the very least. Everybody wants to have this amazing. People spend tens of thousands of pounds on their golf. They spend hours and hours and hours. But very few actually ever get to that level. I say less than 1% ever break par. 86% of Americans say that they would like to write a book. Less than 1% ever do. In 2004, there were 1.2 million books on sale in the US. Now, this isn't ebooks. This isn't even self-published books. These are proper books that are monitored by Nielsen through proper publishers. Out of that 1.2 million, 950,000 of them never sell more than 99 copies. Another 200,000 never sell more than 1,000 copies. Less than 25,000 books ever sell more than 5,000 copies. So you're about 3%. Now, a tiny fraction of books ever sell as many as that has done, and it'll go on to become a film. And as I say, that's not a self-glorifying thing. I'm just saying what that extra work managed to position it into. If you're in the top 1% earners in the UK, you are contributing 27% of the income tax to the economy. Now, this isn't a judgment in terms of whether they should be paying more or less. It's just a simple fact. The top 1% pay 27% of the income tax revenue. So amazing things happen in that top 1%. And in an economy where we're on the first dip, the second dip of a double dip recession, and we've had 3 or 4 years of being flat, that ability to get either personally in terms of what you do, or your business, or the people that work for you into that top 1%, I believe really matters. So I then tried to work out, well, what is it? How do you get started? How did this all work? What were the commonalities in terms of the whole thing? And I worked out that there are a couple of key things with it. First of all, and this is like classic motivational guru theory 101, and I don't intend it to be like that, but what you need, first of all, is a very strong towards goal. You need something that you really want to try and do. You want to turn yourself into that 1% in your business, whether it's golf or whatever. Most people do one of three. Well, there are 3 things that people basically do at the start of every year when they're even thinking about making any change. The vast majority of people take what they've done in the past and slot it into the future. So they take the way that they live and they just live a Groundhog Day. And they get to the end of the next year. They may briefly have some intentions of doing something different, but they get to the end of the next year exactly the same. The same thing happens in businesses, and sometimes they get even worse, particularly at the moment. So you need a very strong towards goal, and you can't just think like that. The second thing that people do is what they do is they think incrementally. They think, okay, well, I'll go maybe get a few golf lessons, or we'll do some customer service training, or we'll work on ourselves in some way, or I'll lose a bit of weight, or I'll go to a night class. I'll do something, and I'll be a bit better at the end of the year. But what you have to really do is sit down with a dirty, great big blank sheet of paper and entirely map out the project and this new oh, I nearly said blue sky thinking there, which is a horrific thing to say, but this entirely new concept for your life or for your business or this whatever challenge you may be trying to do, or the people who work for you. So you put a new future there rather than taking what has happened in the past. So you need a very strong towards goal. You also need a very strong away from goal. The slightly harsh reality is, much as we don't like to think that that is the case, most of us are much more motivated by getting away from something unpleasant than we are towards the lovely thing. So the humiliation of nearly going bankrupt was a very, very strong motivator for me. The humiliation of being the guy potentially who was just the good time Charlie, who had never had a disciplined bone in his body and wanted to try and prove things through to his father or to childhood friends who he hasn't seen for 30 years. That's a very strong motivator. Now, 66% of us, I'd say, are much more motivated by that than that. You need them both. You need to spin between them both if you want to get started. And underlying all of this, you need belief. You need to feel that you can actually do it. You need to feel that if you're going to break par at golf or get to scratch at golf or write a book, that you can actually do it and get it to work. Because if you don't have the belief, none of this matters, because you kind of just give up. You don't have this thing which enables you to get up. If you don't think you can transform your business, if you don't think you can put your business in its sector to that top 1%, then it simply won't happen. So that's how you get started, and you keep spinning those. When I would sit there at home wanting to have a glass of wine and not go out and play golf, I used to just work my way between these things in my head until I came up with something that made me get up and go to the range. And most of the time, it was this. Most of the time, I thought about all the people who told me it wasn't possible and how much they were going to get at me online. So that's how you get started with those three things. And then you end up, basically, as you keep going, there are three rules. There are three rules of engagement if you're going to undertake some form of a transformative challenge. And the first one is guard your associations. GYA is what I talk about that in my head. And this could almost have been written for like minds. Guard your associations is an expression from the business philosopher Jim Rohn. And it basically means be very, very careful of the people that you hang out with. Make sure you're with people who are generally thinking in a positive and supporting manner. And you cannot think of people, you need to avoid being around the negative people. Dr. Rose McDermott from Brown's University in the States conducted a piece of research over 12,000 people, so a substantial piece of research since 1948. And she discovered that if you have a close friend or close work colleague who gets divorced, your chances of getting divorced are increased by 75%. And it's documented over 12,000 people. So if you're sitting there thinking, I don't listen to other people, I have my own mind, you haven't. You just haven't. None of us are strong enough to avoid that stuff. This is what we do. We become the people that we hang about with. We become the average of our friends in terms of weight, in terms of fitness, in terms of income. And if somebody moves outside of those bands, it all becomes a little bit awkward. So you need to make sure that you are around people who are positively benefiting you. The second one is accurate thinking, which is a term from Napoleon Hill, who wrote the famous book, Think and Grow Rich. And basically, this is about looking at where you are with brutal honesty, properly sitting down and thinking, where am I? Exactly where am I? And every stage of the process, you keep measuring. In business terms, that's measuring the right KPIs. You don't do what I talk about as seeing only validation, which is basically where you just see results that meet through with what you want to try and see. So accurate thinking is absolutely brutally seeing where you are now, deciding you want to get to there, and measuring the key things along the way. And the third one of this is pay the price. I have just come out of a cast, which I was in for 3 months, based upon the damage that I did to this wrist during the golf challenge. And it had reached such a stage I couldn't lift a kettle, couldn't do all sorts of things. It'll never be the same again because I hit so many balls off hard range mats. There's an element that if you are going to try and make a big change in something, you won't always necessarily do physical damage to yourself, but you will impact upon friends, relationships, you'll impact upon your ability to sit down in front of the TV, you'll impact on your ability to socialize when you should be focusing on it. If you're going to devote 20 hours a week to making a substantial change to yourself or to your business, there's pain in that. And you have to start off with the acceptance and the understanding that it's not going to last forever, but you're going to have a year with highs and lows, but actually quite a lot of pain. So those are the 3 rules that you use to try and get through it. And why I think that this matters is, as I say, because in an economy at the moment where we're in the 4th year of a recession, everybody is kind of feeling flat. I do an awful lot of work with an awful lot of hospitality businesses, generally reasonably small businesses. We do some corporate work as well. But of all those small businesses, people are flat. People are down. People are depressed. People, to an extent, have had enough. If you put £1 into the stock market 13 years ago, it's worth £1 now. So that we've been on a bit of a roller coaster ride. And why I think this matters is that actually there is the ability to turn yourself or your business from a business that just coasts along into something that can be in that top 1% and ultimately end up with something that potentially is life-changing. Everything changes in that top 1%. Doors open, opportunities abound, people want to work for those businesses. Amazing things happen to those top 1% businesses. And amazing things happen to you if you can transform yourself in various forms too. So my question is, if you believe that you could do something, if there is something that you could do over 1 year and 1,000 hours, what would that be? And if there is something, then are you going to commit to doing it? Thank you very much.